No, but I mean, speaking of catchy, let's talk about names. Let's talk about EX Dojo and how
Mhm.
that came about because that is something that really clicks in people's heads. Not just because the name is catchy, but also because you were something that really represented, like this is how you build yourself. You train in, well, the dojo and learn from the
Mhm.
best and really try to become the best. And that's come to fruition in the DFW, considering that you, what, finished 1, 2, 3 at the last Saturday sets, had multiple people in your ranks doing quite well at regional tournaments and even going outside of the DFW Metroplex and promoting it there as well. But I want to know how EX Dojo even became what it is today. How did you conceptualize it and how did you put it into action?
That's a good question. And EX Dojo, first off, it's something that is ever growing, becoming more and more as time goes on. But
Oh, the
the
story's not over for
initial,
sure. But
yeah,
but how did it
I don't
begin?
even know where it's going. So how did it begin is interesting because I have to think back. But I think truly, and I forgot about this one so recently. I kind of already was doing a um a smaller EX dojo even before I got into like the esports side of things. On the back end, there were a lot of players that wanted to get better, and I went out of my way to make group chats and invite them to it, which in its I guess in itself was like a the birth the seed that eventually became planted and became EX Dojo
Yeah.
was just me helping these local players in this group and kind of coaching and training them and answering their questions and pointing out what they can do better and things like that.
Do you
And at the
think
time, I think I was maybe 19, maybe 20 at the most.
Do you think that
Sorry.
perhaps the seed was planted when like because okay, yeah, you're teaching people how to play the game, perhaps the same way that Arthur taught you?
Yeah, it's and it wasn't just Arthur. A lot of people in my local scene did help me. There are definitely some notable. Uh, what's the word here? There are some notable moments,
Yeah.
unforgettable moments that definitely made a big impact in my understanding of Street Fighter, my understanding of the game. That even expanded to my understanding of real life things.
Mm.
Integra, for example. These days, I know he's kind of like a memer with Ken and just like running around doing dumb stuff. I don't know why he's doing this stuff, but there was a time when he was actually,
With knowledge
one
comes
of
freedom.
my yeah, I guess so, right? Like he doesn't care anymore. But there was a time when he made some very big or I should say noteworthy statements, and those stuck with me. Just doing like the reason why I ever considered a triggering factor, something triggers a response. It's such a
Mm.
simple concept, but that came from him, right? There was usually a trigger that's causing the outcome that you're whatever you're struggling with, whatever is weird, whatever button that keeps happening. There's something that's consistently happening usually before that happens,
Right.
and yeah, it's just kind of like a causation type of thing. But I never really put that together on my own. That was something that came from him. So my entire scene had a huge part in that, and they helped me a lot. So I was very fortunate to have that. But
Hmm.
I think I've always been someone who enjoys helping other people and seeing other people grow. So that kind of just I passed on the knowledge that I learned and enhanced it in every way that I could, at least before I could do that as well. But yeah, I would say that there are a lot of things that happened to lead me to that point, but for sure the starting point was whenever I started making those groups and helping those people, which eventually led to skipping ahead, eventually led to the optic thing, and then eventually led to the creation of EX Dojo right after that.
And I do want to get to the optic stuff eventually, but then again, I mean, the way that you talked about how you learned, getting to the arcade during your lunch breaks and then getting right back after that just to get your ass handed to you, I'd imagine that, some of VX Dojo came about just because you wanted there to be an easier way to do it other than you got to truck yourself all the way to the arcade doing like basically the FGC equivalent of two a days at this point, where you're just kind of grinding it out, putting quarters into the machine, and hoping for the best against some of the best players in DFW. I mean,
Mhm.
I'd imagine that some of those experiences and the hardships that perhaps that presented led to maybe the functional aspect of how EX Dojo's curriculum, as it were, came to be. So, what did you learn from your own learning that you then applied to EX Dojo?
Well, I'm a martial artist myself, right? That's a very huge part of the dojo
Oh,
thing. It's kind of
wait,
tying
wait,
that
wait,
in
wait,
to
what
that.
martial art?
Starting off taekwondo, and then some level of just kickboxing, and then I'm transitioning more towards Muay Thai specifically. And
Oh,
there's been MMA and jiu-jitsu kind of like trickled in here and there.
so you're a striker, is what you're saying?
I'm mainly a striker, yeah. I do just enough grappling to not get got by basic grappling.
Fair enough. I respect that admission, but you're talking about obviously there's a regimen when it comes to that stuff, and I'd imagine that that's something that could be applied to fighting games. Maybe not one to one, but certainly if there's someone who's going to figure out how to do it, it would be the person who came up with the name EX Dojo. How did that maybe come about?
The name
Well, I mean, not the
or
name, but also just how did I mean what you learned, I guess from martial arts now, but also going to that arcade. You figured out a way to produce some pretty good players. I mean, what did you
well,
learn from all
so
that?
I can say this. For me, I don't do very well without information like I mentioned before. I don't do very well if I don't understand how the pieces work. But once I do, I've learned to be very good at explaining those concepts to people in a language that they can understand using analogies and potentially metaphors that really can, directly make sense to them, I guess in the simplest way possible. And there are some things that you don't have to grind out to understand. I can isolate this concept into a drill and teach you what you would have to learn over 1,000 matches within 15 minutes, right? And I figured that out. Is that just repeating this is gonna suck? So instead of me having to go into sparring and work in my jab in sparring in a similar sense, where I'm like, okay, try to hit the jab. It's gonna be really difficult when my opponent is trying to avoid my jab. So if I'm just trying to
Right.
get the form down when my opponent's in the right spot, it might be easier to swing the bag back and forward and then just meet the bag in the center, right? That's something you can repeat over and over. So when your real opponent does that, you don't have to worry about the form, you don't have to worry about the spacing. You already have that pre-trained. You won't have as many opportunities to do it in a real match. So I kind of created these drills, and I've become very good at creating drills to, even on the fly, to solve very specific problems, because I've started to understand the idea of mental stack versus like muscle memory, things like that. How are they relating in this particular problem that you're having? Some things are not going to be fun. You might have to stand there like I did and throw 100 jabs a day on the back, right? But it will be the fastest way to solve the problem you're having right now. And I try to make it fun at the very least. I try to make it enjoyable. Gamifying learning has always been my biggest motto. Try to make it as fun and as much of a game as possible.
Mm.
So I create these unique scenarios like you can play Ryu, but you're only allowed to use crouch medium kick, crouch medium punch, and neutral fireball, and you can only use crouch fierce to anti-air. The purpose of that is it forces you to keep be mindful about the spacing because your crouch heavy punch has a very specific spot where it works, right? Whereas your DP, you can kind of like cop out and walk under and cross cut, right? So if I
Mm.
want someone to learn how to stay in a safe zone, I'll put them on this drill. And Ryu's just a training tool, right? He's not you're not supposed to use this in a real match, but you can use these concepts in a real match and go very far. So I try to do these things that I've learned throughout my martial arts life and try to tweak them for Street Fighter. The players that helped me unfortunately they didn't necessarily have the experience that I have, so there was a lot of struggle with them explaining concepts to me. But like I said, eventually it clicked, and they did put in the time to make sure that I got it. And sometimes it's just weird stuff, some people just don't get certain things. You might just have to grind it out. So I would say how did it directly affect it? Everything that I went through had to happen exactly the way it did, including my struggles, for me to understand how to properly explain it to people and how not to.
And I'd imagine that's applied to your teaching as well. Like when the people under your tutelage are struggling, you have to have them use that. You have to maybe teach them that that struggle is part of learning, and then they can
Yes,
become a better player, not just from your mistake, but from their own.
yes. I tell them all the time. Every session we have, I just want to see one thing better, just one, and I'm okay. I don't need you to be that I go tomorrow, you will learn how to learn, right? That's the first thing I'm always trying to teach people. I'm trying to create a real person, not a bot that just does the right thing. I need you to be able to understand what's happening. So once you learn how to think and how to learn on your own, then I hope that in the future we can be peers, right? I can ask you questions about things as opposed to just me yelling at you because you missed you anti or jabbed or something. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, you can be the Socrates to their Plato, that kind of thing.
Yes, yes, exactly, precisely.
Makes sense. No, and the one of the people, because you're talking about being like 1% better every day, that kind of thing. One of the people, or one of the groups, I should say, that noticed that sort of improvement happening was Optic Gaming, as you mentioned. So how did you pique their attention, and really, how did the EX Dojo Optic partnership start up?
Right. So there's a I guess part of it is my fault. I never really did a good job about explaining, and I still don't about explaining what I do with different companies because I'm known as a player, so people usually imagine that I am a player whenever I'm affiliated with another company, and that's
Yeah.
not always the case. So with Optic, initially the conversations did start with being a player in mind, but
Give us a
after
time
we
frame though. Like what time period are we talking about?
this is 2022. 2018, excuse me. 2018.
Okay, so this is
Um
interesting. So this is like the tail end of like the Optic Call of Duty dynasty. They're like the hottest thing in gaming at this point, and they're
yes.
talking to you.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. So Optic reached out and it was kind of it was weird. So to be extremely clear, right? Optic is just a general name. It's more like the Optic is under a company, at least at the time, called Infinite Esports.
Right, right.
Infinite Esports. It's basically Optic doing business as Infinite Esports is the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is before they
And
became their own corporate entity with the office down at the American Airlines Center, etc.
yeah, this
This
is
is
right.
long
Yeah, right
before.
at
Oh,
2018.
they would have been based in Frisco, Texas, at this point, right?
Briscoe. Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
precisely. So, and I think it was right before when I was talking to them. It was right before that,
Gotcha.
before the office became a thing and everything like that, or it was just in the starting phases. So either way, yeah, they reached out. We're talking a lot. I don't know how much I can say here because there are a lot of like potentials and things that maybe are not safe to say. But yeah, it
Cut
was
out what
more
you
of
need
a
to. Like, I
okay.
mean, or you
What
can
would
tell
you?
us
What
to
would
cut it.
you? They gave me an offer. They asked me what I would want as a player, things like that. And this is when I was kind of like on the up and up, um, and I was progressing rapidly. Right, this is like right after KIT basically.
Right on.
And so, um, yeah, and I talked to them for a while, and then eventually, after they saw what I did, even outside of being a player, it kind of piqued their interest in the academy side and the learning side of fighting games, right, or just gaming in general.
Right.
So they started a sub company called GGEA, GG Esports Academy,
Mm-hmm.
and under that there were a few genres of games. There were shooters, there were MOBAs, and then there were fighters. So essentially, GGEA functioned as a pro team of sorts, but below that were people who were training essentially to become pros. Right? Think of like a path to pro. That was the idea. And a lot of the players in the League of Legends in the Overwatch, they did go pro. Um, but for the fighters, you can actually find this if you search like GGEA on YouTube, Street Fighter Five. You find a lot of it. GGEA Injustice or whatever game. So we had quite a few players that were technically professional players, but the idea was that they're being trained to get to a higher level than what they are right now. So
Like how a lot of
I'll
academy
skip
teams will work for esports organizations. It's just that for fighting games.
exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. So the fighting game thing was more experimental, but I was basically the director of that. But then also I did some general managing for some other things. Don't need to talk about any of that stuff. But yeah, so moving forward from that, anyone who knows that a lot of stuff happened. I ended up not being with the company anymore, and immediately after that, Seth Lon is my business partner essentially from the starting phases of EX Dojo. We immediately started figuring out how do we continue what we're doing, because we had all this momentum, right? It was working. It definitely was working. How do we continue this? So we started brainstorming. Well, let's just do it on our own then. We don't need Optic realistically. Let's just do it on our own. So we did, and we juggled some names, and we ended up on, well, Dojo makes the most sense, right? Let's call it Dojo. It's on brand for fighters, and then EX is kind of like a nod at enhance, right? Enhance moves in.
Try that again. You don't
Right.
need to go from
So
the beginning.
Dojo's, yeah, I got you. So Dojo is just kind of made sense since we're in fighters, and then EX, of course, is kind of a nod at like the enhancing moves in fighting games. So if you play like any Street Fighter before now, pretty much EX was like an enhanced version of your special move.
I play plenty of Third
So
Strike, so yeah.
yeah, yep.
EX Palm Bomber,
So
baby.
that's yep. And the idea behind the EX is just enhancing yourself, right? That's kind of like the idea of it. So that's where the name comes from, and yeah, and that was the starting point of EX Dojo. We went as far as having partnering with different facilities. We had a facility that we partner with south of Dallas. We had a facility that we partner with. Actually, Turning Locator was one of our partners,
Right, we
and
trained them.
we partnered with a lot of school districts. So we did a lot more than just outside of the FGC event. Like we did stuff with school districts and what have you. So it was becoming a thing right before the great COVID happened and crushed us to the bottom.
Yeah, but I mean that killed a lot of momentum for a lot of people, unfortunately. But then again, it never really went away, and now you have players who are doing great things, even still here in the DFW. I mean, what was it? We were talking about Chiefs, talking about Marv, talking about a lot of good people who were doing stuff here in the great state of Texas, and it's still continuing on.